Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, can you see my super corny, like I'm a super fan?
In awe.
Tell me I'm fabulous.
Completely amazing. And the earrings too. Like, it's just gorgeous.
I'm gonna take it off because like I can't and like, you know, but I'm like, I feel like she would get me if this would be like my first impression.
I totally love it. And you look like you have some amazing cuffs too.
I do. I have like the Superwoman cuffs.
Oh, I love it.
Right? I mean, I am woman, hear me roar. Isn't that
That's it.
That's it, right? So I have to tell you before we even start the interview, although you are being recorded, so I want to make sure that that's okay with you.
Yep.
So I went to my local bookstore, and I was like picking up, you know, I wanted like a nice like untouched version of your book, you know, so that I could. And I'm like standing there, and she's like, la la la. I have to share with you this news because I feel like you care about books. And she's like, I do care about books. I'm about to interview her. What? And you should have seen this woman just totally like all her pretenses like go out the window, you know what I mean? And like she transforms from like very proper librarian to like, you know what I mean? Like she's not even gonna do it, and she's like so excited for me. She doesn't even know who I am, you know?
Gosh, that is amazing.
All of that to say that this is what I love about books of your caliber, you know, that really, that's what is so special about books, is that it draws us together. And I'm going to take this off now. But,
but I love it.
I feel like I can't be serious with like, you know, if,
When you put it back on so we can get like a quick picture.
Okay, they want me to put it back on. See? I had asked my friend, I'm like, do you think that this is too corny for Madeline Miller? And she's like, well, I was like, but I'm just going to do it for a second. And then Jordan came in, Jordan. This is Jordan from VIE.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Now.
Very good. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah, we're going to get just a couple of like little pics and like a quick video for Instagram before you guys get started. So.
But as soon as she walked in, she was like, oh, I love the head thing. I'm like, okay, you get it, right?
I'm like a cosplay nerd. So.
That's perfect. Well, you know, I have a theater background, so I appreciate an excellent.
Well, what's funny is that once I was like driving like this by myself. Why I'm sharing this information, I don't know, because it makes me look that much nerdier. But I was like driving with it because like, why not rock it if you have it by yourself? And I'm like, maybe I'll just be Circe for Halloween.
Yeah.
But no one would get that. I'm like, oh, but if I carry the book. Get it, right?
You just need someone to do it with you to go as a pig. And then I think people would get it.
Oh my God, the pig. Oh my God. You just made my Halloween costume. You just made my Halloween costume. So when you get this like random picture of Solange with like a pig.
I love it. I love it. I that will make me very happy.
Okay, now I am going to take it off then. But what I wanted to say is that that is what I love about books like yours. And well, there's two thoughts that I have, but the main one is that it draws people that are complete strangers, and they can be like, you know what I mean? Like so excited for me, like that I want to talk to you, you know, even though she's not going to be in the room, because it's kind of that shared experience of, I liken it to when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And people get excited for it's total strangers are like super excited for you, and they're like, oh.
I know.
And at first you're like,
true.
You totally don't get it.
Yeah.
But then when you have the experience, you're like, oh, that person understood that we were going to share a world.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Right?
Exactly. I love that analogy. I think that's exactly right. And that's how, you know, whenever I see someone reading a book I love, like I immediately feel like we're friends.
Right. Like, you know, a little bit of my soul.
Yeah.
You know? And it's like, it's that world, you know, again, going back to that analogy of, I didn't know what that world was before I had it. But now that I've lived it, now we are connected in this invisible thread.
Yes.
You know, and when we go specifically to your book, like I will say, embarrassed that I'm not a scholar of mythology.
No, need to be.
I don't need to be, which is what was so special to me, is that I didn't need to be a scholar. I just needed to know how to read and appreciate beautiful prose and a beautifully developed character. And that's all I needed. And I truly, I remember like looking at this gold cover, because that's how I remember it when I first read it. It was that original like gold cover, and
Yeah.
I was like, everyone's reading this book. And then I read the back and I was like, it's mythology. I'm like, I'm gonna read that. I'll admit, because again, it's mythology. I don't read mythology, right? And then it just took me opening up its pages, and I was like, this is why everyone's reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you have put in. I mean, from what I've read, 5 years is a commitment in any relationship.
Yes.
Let alone a relationship with the gods, and the demons, and the pigs, exactly. And the voice of your head that wants you to tell her story. Yeah. So, on the behalf of all those characters and all of us that have read it, thank you for committing to this project and making it a whole beautiful body of work.
Oh, thank you.
I mean that
so much, and that is really lovely. And I love to hear that people who don't know mythology read it, because that just I wanted it to be for everyone, and so that means a lot.
Well, good, because it's honest. Embarrassed but honest. So how about we just start with what you most wanted out of this book when you started writing it? I mean, this was your second book, right? The first book, and let me just show it. This was her first book, which was also a smashing success. It's nice to come out, and it took this book took how long to write?
That took 10 years, and then Circe was 7 because I started while I was in copy edits for Song of Achilles, so there was some overlap.
But 10 years, I mean, but it's your first book and it was well received, but it's one of those when, again, you look at these like debut authors, and you're like, oh man, I could do that, right? Like I could do that. It's like, absolutely. Do you have 10 years to spare? It's always longer than we think. So I imagine that after spending 10 years with that and all of the success that you had, there's a lot of pressure in bringing in, sitting again and reinventing a whole other world. What did you do in that hiccup of time, and how hard was it for you to go back, or easy to go back into the writing process? Can you speak to that?
Sure. It was challenging because I had spent 10 years in the mind of Patroclus, who's my narrator for Song of Achilles, and I had been thinking as him and sort of seeing the world through his eyes and speaking as him for so long. That there was definitely a mourning period when I had sort of a couple weeks where I had written the last thing I was ever going to write for Song of Achilles, and I knew that I was sort of finished with telling their story, and there was this this feeling of like having to let go of that. And then starting to think about Circe, and it's always kind of whiplash as a writer to go from the end of a piece to the beginning of the next piece, because by the time you finish the work, you know that world so well, and you've been deep in it for so long. And so you have, even though you still, I was editing up to the end, I had this sort of deep mastery of the world. And then I go to Circe, it's really exciting, everything is fresh, everything is new, but
you're not committed to anything at the beginning either.
Yeah, I have to get to know Circe from scratch. And so it was very exciting, but it was also very much of an exploration where I wanted to kind of read everything I could find about her, and then I would write stuff and throw it out, and write more stuff and throw it out. And so it was a real trial and error for me. I imagine the process of hearing my characters' voices as kind of like a musician tuning an instrument, that I'm writing and I'm listening for something, and
Mm.
I can't really articulate what I'm listening for. I'm listening for that like perfect pitch, but I can't really articulate it until I found it. Yeah. So, but it's this very kind of mysterious process of going down every wrong path, trying again, trying again. Just, with like, sometimes the changes are about voice and the way the character is talking. Sometimes the changes are Circe's siblings. In mythology, in some versions, she has 3 siblings, and in another version, she has 2 siblings, which in my mind completely changes the dynamic of her family. Is it a square in terms of the children, or a triangle? And
Yeah.
so,
Position in that. Yeah.
yeah, so, there's like a huge psychological chunk of the book that, until I had decided that, I kind of couldn't really tackle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so
So let me pause you there if you don't mind.
yeah.
So, do you have siblings? And where do you play inside of that square, triangle, or line?
Yes. So I am very fortunate. I have one sibling who's my half brother, and his mind is not bent on destruction, which is,
That's wonderful. That's helpful.
Homer's description of Aeetes is that he has a mind bent on destruction. So I was not drawing on personal experience there, thankfully. But I do sort of, as a writer, you are an observer and a listener, and if you want to say it in a negative way, an eavesdropper. I mean, I never, go out of my way to sneak on something, but if I'm on, especially in this day of cell phones, like, you can just sit on the train and learn a lot about the people around you, because people, if you're talking on the phone, those people kind of feel like they're private, even though they're speaking at full volume on a train. So, there's something about that that's sort of, so I've done a lot of listening. I love psychology. I love family psychology. So I've done a lot of reading about family psychology and sort of thinking about it. And I have some very close friends who I've sort of observed their sibling dynamic. So I'm one of those people, I don't think you have to have lived through something in order to write about it. I think, imagination, immersion, research can kind of, an observation can carry you through.
Absolutely. I mean, I found that, again, obviously, the relationships that Circe has in the novel with the cast that she's surrounded by, in some ways, there's so much noise coming at her, right? Because everybody has these strong personalities. I mean, it's, I'm Hispanic, which I like to say is, you come into my house, and I was the firstborn of 2 others, and everyone's competing to be heard. So what that means is everyone just becomes louder and louder. Like, no one's taking turns, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways that's kind of how I felt when I was reading Circe, is that no one is taking turns. Everyone is concerned with their agenda.
Yes.
But that is what makes her dynamic very interesting, in the sense that she is interested in, not even at the beginning of the novel, not even so much her agenda, but these poor humans that are out there.
Yeah.
And she relates to them because she is not as loud or as heard in her family of superstars, because that's really what she has, right? She's living in the shadows of these like gods, and even her mother, who's a nymph, is still this beautiful kind of like the archetype of what a woman is and offers. And so right from the get-go, you build this world where she is an outcast in a world of power, and I felt like the humans there, she speaks for us in many ways. Like, she's our advocate.
Yes. And so Homer, the inspiration for that came right from the Odyssey. So Homer has this kind of very brief, almost throwaway description of her as the dread goddess who speaks like a human. And it's just one word in the Greek, audeasa, speaking like a human. And it's, it's beautiful. But it's also very mysterious. And so that was sort of this word that I just kept coming back to. Well, what does it mean to be born a goddess, but to speak like a human. And so that ended up sort of, as you're alluding to, becoming kind of the structure of the novel. And I saw her that, what is different about Circe is that she is capable of empathy, and she's capable of sort of wanting to reach out and help others, understand others, that her focus is somewhat inward but also outward, whereas her family is all on sort of, as you say, their own agenda. They're completely wrapped up in, their narcissistic worldview, whereas she really wants to move outside of that. And so very early on, she confronts, or she meets Prometheus, who is another god who is very focused on the mortal world and on sort of helping people. And so that becomes this huge, I wanted to convey with Circe this experience of, she's born into this family. She feels like she doesn't belong, but she can't really explain why she feels that way. Mm-hmm. It's all sort of just like this mess that's happening around her. And then she meets Prometheus, and suddenly she starts to kind of understand what it is that she wants that she can't have from her family.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, kind of going, what you're saying to this voice whisper in your ear, in layman terms, we often talk about like, oh, you just need to find your own voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I loved that because I got that right from the beginning of like, her own voice is a human voice. So from the very beginning, I felt like as a human, who of course wants to be as beautiful as her mother and as powerful as her father, right? That's what we want. That's why we read books. We want to like live vicariously through these characters. All of a sudden, I find myself actually wanting to be Circe because she is so much more relatable, and I'm rooting for her because she's rooting for me because we're in the same camp.
Yeah.
And I share with you that one of my favorite things about her appreciating humanness was that part of hard work. I thought that was really, for me as a reader, and I imagine I speak for many, the fact that you have to earn your keep, and that she reinvented herself in a way that the gods didn't necessarily approve of, but like we're definitely like scratching their head over, like how, where did you get that kind of inspiration for it?
It was from the idea of her witchcraft. I was really interested in sort of, so she's born a nymph with absolutely no power. And nymphs in the ancient world, in the mythology, these are women who are pawns or they are prey. They are characters that have no control over their own lives. And yet, when we see Circe in the Odyssey, she has all this power. She has independence. How did that happen? And then the answer is witchcraft. She decides she's going to literally invent her own source of power. And in order to wield it, she has to live by herself on an island, but she's willing to, for her, that price is worth paying. And witchcraft is not, in the ancient world, the tradition of witchcraft is not at all sort of the Shazam magic type. It is, it's all about knowledge and skill and dedication. It's about sort of learning what the different herbs do, what they do in combination, understanding sort of like the movements of the stars and the moon. And so it's knowledge based and skill based. And that, I think that's part of what drew me to her character, because I am a person who spends a lot of time editing and revising and, working. I feel like any vocation, any craft, any art, whatever it is, it takes that level of attention. And so her power comes from something that is human, because that's what humans do. We try and we get better, and we try again and we get better. And she follows that path because she decides to set aside the divine power and go in this direction of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I love that world of Ayaya, and I'm sorry that I may not pronounce things perfectly, but again, I didn't study mythology.
You got it.
I loved your book.
Yeah, it's a totally, I say Ayaya, which is a little bit more the Greek way, and you say Ayaya, which is a little bit more the English way. They're both completely fine.
So we're fine. We can still read this book and say it in our
Yes. And
I'm
Oh,
sorry?
sorry. I was just gonna say we don't have any recordings of ancient Greek, so
Thank you for that pass. I loved this world that you created there because it felt, again, so tactile to me. And kind of going back to what you were saying with the witchcraft, is that, there's a stance there, and where she said, these elements can not work also.
yeah,
So there's a measure of failure too.
yeah,
Like, you have to get it, and you have to own it, and you have to do this experiment, and that's what it is. It's the experimentation of life, whereas the gods, everything was guaranteed.
yes,
Right? Like, if I make a rule, like, there'll be consequences, but really, I know, maybe not a rule, but like a commandment, like, it's going to go down this way. I'm all powerful. And she really kind of works in this world where she lives between two worlds. Yeah. And Aya, to me, was really that space of, she's alone, but yet she looks at the world that she creates for herself to fulfill her and teach her who she's going to become and her own evolution.
yeah.
So as we speak about evolution, tell me a little bit about time. I've read in different sources that time also was an important element for you to consider as you're writing this book of eternal deities out there.
Yeah. It was something I thought a lot about, and it was part of that initial sort of trying to find her voice, because I wanted her voice to have this kind of alien formality, kind of strangeness that comes from having lived for such a long time, as if she's using some archaicisms. Because she has lived for such a long time, she's lived through the evolution of her own, her language. And so she has some of these sort of old ways of talking. So I wanted some of that. I also wanted I wanted that time to really feel like sometimes there are 100 years that just go by and they're gone. And, I wanted to kind of play with the pacing of the narrative at moments where it's like speeding things up, and then other moments slowing them way down.
By the way, you conquered.
Thank you. So I thought about that a lot, because I wanted the weight of her years to also, mean something, and to see how long it takes her to kind of come to this understanding of herself. And I loved what you were saying about her evolution, because part of what I really wanted to do along with all that time is sort of map her story as a foil to Odysseus's story. So Odysseus's story in the Odyssey is a story of him longing to go home. He's longing for nostos, is the Greek word. And he has a home. It's Ithaca. He has a wife. He has a young son, or he's not young anymore. But Circe doesn't have that. She is escaping her home. And so she has to create, that's what Aya is. Aya is sort of her new home that she creates for herself.
What's her prison that she makes into a home?
Yes. Yeah. And then part of that sort of finding a home is also like finding, who is my family? My family is turns out not the people I'm related to. It's going to be these people that I choose.
Absolutely. Except for when she has a son.
Yes. Which is also her choice. She chooses to.
Granted, it could be the time and place that I'm at, I'm a mother. But to me, that's when she became the most human to me. Yeah. Where she has this love that she just, and how badly do we want to protect, our children? And she actually had the power to be able to do that in theory.
Yeah.
But she becomes self-sacrificing. Like I found that so, when we're talking about time, that was a time that really slowed down for me. Like that was like the ballad to me inside of Circe. It's just like, there's this the way that I read it, and we all interpret books differently, but that was her greatest love. And as I'm talking about love, I love the fact that she's not no one's pretending that she's virgin-esque here. She's very, good for her. She is a woman that would work well in our times.
Yes.
She owns herself. She knows what she wants. she's been hurt, she's overcome, you know,
Yeah.
she's going to make the best of it. And then she becomes a mother. And then you see again her just become this completed character and this very human kind of love that, unlike the way that she was raised, it's just like this total like desperate storyline, right? Where she's just like, I'm not where I come from. I am who I have decided to create going forward.
Yes. And I think that takes, I mean, that part was such a core piece of the novel for me. Because of, you know, she does, as you say, come from such a horrendous place. And then she has to decide what kind of parent she's going to be. Obviously, she does not want to be the type of parent her parents were. She wants to sort of be this new thing. And, but it's kind of shocking that suddenly you have this child that is completely dependent on you, but also you have to respect their boundaries, and they're their own person. And I feel like that is, and it can be very isolating, that sort of, you know, all-consuming early years of childhood. And so I wanted sort of that sense, and how emotionally taxing, I mean, physically taxing, but emotionally taxing that investment is. I'm totally worth it. And as you say, you know, the greatest love of her life, but it's demanding things of her that she's never really had to do before. And, you know, and I think she finds new depths in herself. And she challenges herself to always do better. And that was the part of Circe that I love, is sort of at the end of the day saying, what should I have done better? Tomorrow I'm going to do it better. You know, that part of her, that you don't always make the right choice in the moment, but then you think, okay, let me own up to this and let me do it better next time. And
right.
that
introspection.
Yeah.
And every step of the way, there's this like level of introspection, even at the risk of her, you know, she lives alone in this island and has this son. And am I going to let him go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Be lonely again.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I look at my children, Madeline, and I feel like crying, because I'm like, tomorrow you're going to go to college. Yeah. They're 8 and 10.
No, but it is. It's gonna feel that fast.
You know, and again, I think that is I personally love beautiful prose, that, you know, the way that you wrote it. But more than that, it was the fact that these are concepts that have lasted from the beginning of time and will last through the end of time. Yeah. You know, the love that you have in these core relationships, yeah. You know, and how you learn out of love, but you also learn out of pain. And yeah. I mean, she definitely had a lot of pain going. There were definitely a lot of sections of this book where you're just like, oh, but that's just so wrong. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Yeah. And it's just so beautifully written.
Oh, thank you. Well, in terms of sort of the last thing about her motherhood that was really kind of significant to me, and I have kids too, and I feel like it definitely, you know, informed some pieces. But although thankfully my children are not demigods, but you know, I feel like the part of that sort of difficulty is also that it is such an intense and all-consuming, like sublime, spiritual, emotional, like it's this sacred life has been entrusted to you, and like that is a sacred responsibility. And at the same time, like they've dropped the spoon on the floor for like the 20th time, and you know what I mean? So it's like this like incredibly like tedious physical labor, and this like totally transcendent responsibility. And, you know, I wanted to give that its weight. And I feel like that women, particularly in the ancient material, their parenting, their sort of motherhood is considered not as important, because it was male writers and male protagonists almost always in the ancient world. And so really focusing in on sort of an honoring what she's doing as a mother was really important.
So let me ask you, as you're writing Circe, it takes you 5 years or 7 years. As just a normal person, living, you're growing.
Mhm.
But if you have this Circe in your ear constantly whispering to you, what does she teach you? Like, do you feel, I imagine as any writer that spends that much time with one character primarily, you're molding her, but she's teaching you things too. What would you say, how did it change you? What did she teach you? Is there anything that you kind of discovered along the way?
Yes, I think there are sort of two things. One is that even painful experience can spur growth, and that doesn't mean we are glad we had the painful experience, but that you can move through it and grow from it and learn from it, and that it doesn't have to be. So that was a piece of it. And then I think the larger piece was actually just owning my own sort of art, that Circe is so fierce and dedicated to her craft, both her weaving and, more importantly, her witchcraft. And on the island, she's able to do that because she has this independence. She has this space where her father's not getting in her face, her mother's not getting in her face. She's not thinking about the expectations. She's not thinking about how she has to appear to someone else. She's just thinking about what she wants to create. And I think for women, that's a hard thing to claim oftentimes. It's hard to claim it. It's hard to find like the literal time and space in our world, but also I think it's hard to find the mental space. And I think women oftentimes set aside their own art, or they, diminish it, or they denigrate it, or, it's the last thing on the list. And so seeing her put so much effort into it and have it be such a fulfilling and important thing for her, I think gave me permission to make it a centerpiece of my life too. To sort of, when I catch myself doing that, like putting it aside or denigrating, it's like, well, I don't, oh, you're right, we have to go to the store, and maybe I don't have time to write today, to say like, stop, like, this is my discipline. It's important that and I have two daughters, it's important that I role model this for them, that
Absolutely.
like, so.
Which is so hard. Again, a theme of the book where it's like, in so many ways, she puts others before her, she puts humans before her. And yet there is that level of understanding that if she's ever going to understand the power of her own voice, the power of herself, she needs to be disciplined enough to work with things that may fail.
Yeah.
That may teach her, again, remind her how she is not a god. The very thing that kind of has separated her from this land of beautifulness and, romance, because that's how we all envision the world of the gods, right? I mean, we have parties about it over here, a party, don't, where I want it to be like this beautiful, like Grecian goddess, but that is, and I think that oftentimes when we look at mythology, that's the way that we think about it in modern day. And Circe was such a reminder of, again, those lessons that teach us who we are. And mythology, although I have not studied it, I don't have a degree on it, going back to it reminded me of these lessons that we have had throughout time. Mythology has survived because the lessons are true. There's these like philosophical like signposts that if we choose to follow directions, we will know, that one's probably not where you want to go. Like, gonna be a harder road if you go down that path.
I totally agree. I think that's so that, human nature, that there are so many life lessons and sort of so many human experiences that are embedded in all of this. And thinking about the gods in particular, one of the sort of like great human morals that has been iterated over and over and over again in various is like, be careful what you wish for.
Right.
And I feel that that's sort of what the gods are, is that, they have eternal youth. They have a seemingly endless amount of power. I mean, depending on where you are in the hierarchy, but you have power, you can fulfill all your own desires, and it makes you a complete sociopathic narcissist. That's what happens, because you lose, unless and what's interesting is that psychological studies have actually shown that that happens to real people. You can fight it. You can fight it if you're one of like the super billionaires of the world, and you choose to be aware of that tendency, you can fight it. But if you choose not to be aware, then what happens is they've shown that empathy levels start dropping. And so that was something I thought a lot about, is, empathy is really at the core of both of my novels. And it's something that I see as the greatest human gift. And I think it's what's going to get us through all the dark times. And so for me, the gods are people who have lost their empathy.
Yes. I mean, I will say it is very timely.
Not intentional.
Right.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I think
it's very timely. Wherever you may stand.
Yeah.
And without, going into politics per se, we all know that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Right? We're all having this conversation.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to how books unite people and have us talk about these subjects, that the core of it is still, how do we show up as people? How do we honor work? How do we honor empathy? What do we believe are the important roles that really kind of create a culture that's healthy?
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to live in. that we want to live in,
Where it's okay for everyone to live in the society, not just for some people. Yeah.
Exactly. And, going back to our, how we first started about me carrying the pig, and I don't know how I'm going to get a pig, but you will get a picture from me, like this, me and my pig. But let's talk a little bit about that, because that is something that whenever you're writing a book that I think toes the line of feminism, and men are over here and women are over here, and we're all just on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly really enjoyed that whole turning men into pigs, not because she's turning men into pigs, but because there's that explanation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And it's like, here's is somebody that, has really gotten the wrong end of the stick when it comes to what she deserves in life, or what she was born into. The power dynamic has really worked not in her favor.
Yeah.
And can you speak to that? I mean, just the turning men into pigs, because I do think, we joke about it, but it's an important element of Circe. I think that is a very, it was a point in the book where I read it and I put it down because I didn't want to just read through it.
Yeah.
I wanted it to just kind of sink in,
Yeah. Well, it was something that I thought so much about, and partially it's the great mystery of her episode in the Odyssey, because it's not explained why she's doing this. She sort of, the way it's portrayed is that it's just because she's, evil or petty or this capricious, but there's no explanation, as if there is none. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very clear that she represents sort of male anxiety about female power, that if women have power, they're going to wield it over men, they're going to be capricious, they're going to do evil things. And so actually the original is very male versus female, that the original Odyssey is sort of, and then she has to be forced to kneel in front of Odysseus while he has his sword out, very phallic. And, she has to kind of shrink in order to serve his story. And then it's okay. Order has been restored. The woman has kneeled. The man has waved his sword around. And now we can move on from this moment. And so it's clear that there's like, oh, we're having so much anxiety about female power. Don't worry, we put it back in the box. And so part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to give her a I mean, it's a very extreme thing to do, to turn pigs. And so I felt like, well, why, how would you start doing this? Why would you start doing this? And so I wanted to think about that, and I wanted to give her a reason that had real weight. But I also, you know, it was very important to me. I was very happy the other day. I was at a book event, and this older man pulled me aside, and he said, I thought I was going to hate your book because I thought it was going to be all about hating men, but it wasn't. I really liked your book. I was like, great. Because, you know, I think one of the things that I try to make clear is that, you know, there are a lot of people in this society, in any society that is oppressing 50% of its population, it's way more than 50%. Right, that men are going to be being policed as well. And so she finds a number of men sort of in her journey, most particularly Odysseus's son Telemachus, who are also struggling with the gender expectations that are placed on them. You know, he doesn't want to be a Homeric hero like his father. He wants to follow this other path, but he's being forced into it because that's what male heirs do, is they follow in their father's footsteps. So I wanted to be clear that I was looking at how this was constricting people across the board, not just women, but men too. And then I think finally the thing that I wanted to think about in terms of pigs is that people often ask me, is this where male chauvinist pig comes from? Is this where sexist pig comes from? Does it come from Circe? And the answer is no. That the idea of sort of male chauvinist pig, you know, men are pigs because pigs are bad and men are bad, like that sort of circle, didn't exist in the ancient world in that way, because the Greco-Romans saw pigs as sacred, as animals that were sacred to goddesses, and they were sacrificial animals, and they were had sort of important roles in holy rites specifically attached to goddesses. And so what Circe is doing with those men is much more mysterious than just that simple, you know, this is men are bad and therefore men are pigs. So and the men, the sort of,
so is that where that line comes from, where they're like, they make terrible pigs? I mean, it's so funny when,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I've heard you read that line, you know, at readings,
yeah,
and you deliver it even more beautifully than, you know, it's written, but yeah.
Yes, men make terrible pigs. And in fact, in turning them into pigs, I wanted my Circe to be reaching for something deeper, to be sort of, it's like this longing to have them experience, you know, another worldview, to have them understand. I mean, pigs are, I think, and actually my Circe identifies with pigs. Like, she sees them as survivors. She sees them as these, you know, clever clever creatures that are constantly underestimated because of how they look. And so in that moment, I wanted her to be reaching for something else.
Well, I mean, and you see it throughout the novel that she does love men.
Yeah.
She does. You know, the story is really one of having great empathy for men. You know, and even when she is wronged, how I felt, and I don't know if this is the spirit in which you wrote it, but it almost felt like to me that although she felt victimized, she also understood that it was just part of their own development, that they had not been developed.
Well, I certainly wanted her to understand, you know, by the time she's assaulted and raped, she has had a very close relationship with Daedalus, for instance, so she has seen other patterns of men out there. Hermes, I would not put him up as such a, it was when when one of my editors, as she was reading the book, she got to the part where she has the affair with Hermes, and she wrote in the margins, I'm pretty sure I've had this boyfriend. You
know, there's some signposts again. So we've all had throughout the years.
There's some boyfriends are timeless.
Timeless. You
Yeah.
should not go there.
Yeah.
But why not?
But why not? Right.
Why not? Let me see. Maybe it'll be different for me. No, baby girl, not different. Learn from Circe.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So let me see. As we start, my questions went away just because I got wrapped up in our conversation. Are there any questions that you had for the reader that you know, as you're writing this, that I think that when you're writing, you're hoping that it's being interpreted a certain way, and part of the art and craft of writing is intuiting what the readers are reacting like. Like right now, we're having a Skype conversation. I can see your facial expressions. Yeah. So when you look a little confused, I'm going to change my dialogue, right? I might spend a couple more minutes explaining what I mean. You do that in a book.
Yeah, yeah. I think I always want the reader to feel taken care of, in the sense that I want them to feel, and this is something that I love when I pick up a book and I start reading the first page and I'm like, oh, this writer's going to take care of me. Like, this writer has thought about this, and they're not like hand feeding me, but like they are on top of this story. They know what they're they're going to take me through this world and on this journey, not telling me how to feel, but showing me this world. And so I want to try and give readers that experience. And when you're in the hands of a good storyteller, and you can just sort of, there's this, I don't know if this happens to you, but to me, I kind of just relax. I'm like, oh, great. Like this, I can just.
My mind's not working. I can just experience it.
Yes, yes. And it's filled with thought at the same time, but it's just knowing you're in good hands. And so I want my readers to feel that way. I don't want, I like if people have different reactions, that some people find some things that Circe does more sympathetic than others. Some people find it not sympathetic. Some people can't get over certain things. That's okay. I sort of like that discussion. And that's why I like working with first person narrators, is because I want them to feel like they're fully fleshed people, and it's okay to have different reactions.
Let me ask you, what, if anything, has been a negative feedback that you've received that actually felt like the biggest compliment? You know what I mean? Like sometimes, like someone's like, rah! And you're like, yes.
I haven't had that. Let me think. That's a really good question. I mean, I think I guess a couple people have asked me, why do you hate Odysseus so much? And I've been like, I've just introduced you to all the myths about Odysseus in the story come from actual ancient sources. I didn't make up any of the negative stuff about him, but all that stuff has been forgotten. Everyone loves Odysseus. He's everyone's favorite hero. People say. And so I really appreciate that, because I'm like, no, he's very complex. He's not just this easy, he's not a hero the way we talk about heroes today. He's a very complicated and ambiguous figure. And I wanted to bring all of that complexity to it. So I take that to mean that I was doing my job.
You showed a different perspective, which is exactly what you did with Circe.
Yeah.
You reinvented Circe, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gave her a voice, like the very thing that at the beginning of the book, she's kind of looked down on and doesn't know and doesn't understand. You gave her that voice, and it echoed, because there are so many fans. I mean, you pretty much have like a cult following now. You have people wearing these things. There'll be people with like pigs walking around instead of little like pocket dogs.
It is an honor. It is an honor. And, part of what I loved, aside from Circe's story, is just having her, have characters like Penelope around her, like her friendship with Penelope, with, there were so many pieces that I really was excited to write, and sort of her coming through and allowing herself, you know, to finally be herself was it felt like a privilege to write it, and it feels like a privilege that people resonate with it.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was so much fun.
Well, thank you.
I was a little bit nervous about it, but
and you definitely have my favorite outfit. I love
next time I expect like full on mythological attire.
I do have a latex Medusa mask.
Oh my God, please. Wear it next time.
So, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you.
It was such a pleasure to meet you too.
Bye.
Bye.